Hi, it's Alan here. It's from Hi-Fi Plus at the Munich show, and here with John Harker from REL, and we're going to talk about an interesting concept in subwoofer-ing.
There we go. Hello, Alan. It's so good to see you. John Hunter from REL. We're here to talk about a few different concepts. We talked about, Alan and I off microphone, talked about this. We thought it would be a good, quick introduction to what we call the six-pack, lovingly. It's more formally known as a line array. And everybody who sees these, the immediate reaction is, oh, it's one of those huge American Rambo things, right? It's just more is better, right? It's a 7.4 V8 with a supercharger. It can do that, and it can do it in its sleep. The purpose, however, is a little different. It's a little more refined. So when we experience bass in natural reality, bass always has a vertical component to it. Anything, whether it's an explosion, whether it's the actual sound of things happening in real life, any kind of music strikes your frame, right? It can strike your sinuses, it hits you in the chest cavity. It's extremely important to realize that when you're reproducing it, we can't pull all of that off from low to the floor, right? So how does this work? The basic physics of it is really quite simple. The unit that's anchored on the floor, and we literally call it our anchor unit, because you have this reinforcement of the floor, essentially half of a horn working for you, you get profoundly deep bass. We call it floor crawl, right? If you can envision for just a moment, take both of these out, just blanket out as though they were clear cubes of air, and this is just floating 18 inches off the ground. There's no way this is reproducing exceptionally deep bass. But what it can do is give you really fast pistonic mid-bass. So, for example, if somebody's playing a kick drum, and the way that mallet snaps against the skin of the drum, it produces a compression wave, a pop, right? That's what the job of this center one is. And then this one's extremely difficult to explain. Obviously, we're perched way up 3.5 feet off the ground. It's a completely different event. And there's a thing that happens in live music that we've never been able to get before. I can't tell you how many times over the years you'd be driving home from a concert and it's like, God's sake, we're not even close, right? And it's not the frequency, and it's none of those things. When you see and hear live music, it sparkles in air. It is literally an almost visual event. There are high-frequency harmonics in a concert hall. If you listen to classical music, you just can't believe these beautiful glinting harmonics. How do you get that? And the strangest thing about it is it actually originates in bass. So this is a really magical kind of a piece. Ultimately, the proof is in the pudding. Come down, listen to a well set up six-pack sometimes. It takes no more space, physical floor space, of course, than one of our medium-sized subs to begin with. We make this available on every model from our S510, which is sort of a mid-level sub for us, right on up to our top reference models. And what it does is it projects the third dimension. Now here's something that people just don't quite grasp. Most of us, when we talk about dimensionality or three-dimensionality, there's an implication that that's depth of field in a stereo sound field. We've been doing that since about 1973, right? Ever since Rogers brought out the LS35A, you had left to right and you had front to back. It wasn't really hard to hear. You went, holy smokes, how are you getting that out of this little box? In the last 20, 30 years, what's really evolved is the third dimension is height. And we're used to experiencing things, as I said, in height. When you hear a grand speaker, a 300,000 pound speaker, we're often sitting now from a perspective where we're looking up at a stage that's maybe 3 feet elevated and real people standing on the stage. Your perspective is looking up. It's actually realistic to a real person on a real stage. And it takes height in order to replicate that in the bass as well. You simply can't get that grandeur, that sense of open, spacious clarity by having it all stuffed down on the ground. So that's the entire premise to the six-pack, is it allows you to go inside the music. You stop being an external participant and you really, really feel intimately connected with what's happening.
Just a brief interruption, esteemed viewers. As you may know, I'm Tom Martin, Chief Content Officer of The Absolute Sound. We have a new product. It's on the Substack platform, and we're going to do some interesting things with Substack. First of which is reader questions and answers. Each Monday, Readers will submit questions. We'll pick the most interesting ones and we'll answer the questions on Friday. We'll also have early access to articles and special blogs that don't appear anywhere else. We hope you'll join us. It's only a cost of a cup of coffee per month. Just check on the screen or in the show notes below. Thanks, and now back to the show.
So, do you set the subwoofers are set at slightly different parameters?
Yes, so each one of these subs, these each have their own, obviously, crossover and amplifier. They're integral, complete units. This particular one has about 800 watts to it. They go on up to 1,000. And I'm working on some big stuff that has 1,500 to 2,000 in the future. And each one of these, to work properly, has to have its own gain control and its own crossover. And each one of those is set individually, and they can be massively different, even left to right. The worst I saw was a wonderful store in Los Angeles in California. The ones on the left were typically a gain setting of something like 5, 3, and 7. And on the right hand, where there was really quite a massive air intake register for the HVAC system, it started at 17, 15, and 19. You're like, good Christ. But that's what's happening. Each half of the room is wildly different. So you have to be able to accommodate that. As an example, what we typically find is you really want the bottom, the profound bass, to be very firm and present. This one might be set, for example, at 8. The next one up, which you, strangely enough, if you get any thickness in a 6-pack, it's inevitably because the actual center channel sub is overbalanced. So this one is inevitably softer than that. If this was 8, that might be set at 5. And this one, because it's got no support from the room whatsoever, will typically be the highest numeric, but might be the lowest output. So if this is 8, this is 5, you might have this up at 10 or 11, and you'd still find yourself just having this gently fold in. As a sidebar, when you're listening to this one, and we're using real music here, not just bass-laden stuff, there's this beautiful fill that you hear, and you can literally control the amount of air in the hall, as it were, off of the gain of this. So once you've got it properly crossed over, this is what allows you to sort of set that balance, and you get this beautiful hall fill.
And naturally, this lends itself toward Dolby Atmos.
Oh,
and so we're now, when we're looking towards Atmos music and everything, this is starting to be much more of a thing now, getting more of the high-end acceptance, and what we need is really good bass control and bass bottom end.
And you raise an interesting point. So we're known for music, but we've really progressed aggressively into home theater. So we have a new HT range, it's our second generation. The flagship of that is also stackable, it is also 6-packable. And the fascinating thing, I didn't even think about it, because I did it for people that wanted to be able to use it for music and theater. When you use those in a theatrical context, right? You've got a huge 140-inch screen, whatever, with a big projector, and you get a 6-pack of those flanking the screen. We've done demos in which you can demonstrate that when you take the top layer out, perfectly layered on, we've got another REL on the center channel, it's all working beautifully. You're used to it. You've got the entire screen is being taken up with sound. We'll take the top layer off, and everything will drop to the middle of the screen and down. You take the center section of the wedding cake out, and it literally drops below screen, which is what we've been used to for 30 years. It's just extraordinary. So both for home theater applications, of course, you get massive dynamics. Yeah. You know, those are something along the lines of an 800 watt 15 inch as well. So you can get massive dynamics, but it's really, again, about restoring that three-dimensionality. When you hear dialogue properly lofting onto the screen, and you take out a couple of stacks of subs, and it drops, it starts to sound like this again, you're like, okay, I'm a buyer, I'm in.
Yeah. Yeah, right. But I think the other thing that a lot of people forget is just the importance of bass control in terms of controlling the room dynamics, which I think is a huge thing.
Right, so what Alan's talking about is the fact that what I often experience, especially with competitor subs in rooms, go into stereo stores all the time, and they're trying to accomplish high output out of a single unit. And what it inevitably winds up doing is they wind up having to crank it up in order for it to be impressive bass. And what it winds up doing is announcing itself like crazy, right? You have this thing that is pushing at you, making massive amounts of noise, where when you distribute it evenly, both in vertical modes and spreading it out, it effortlessly just flows into the room. Right? It's not the sense of having things thrust at you and pounding you. You just sit in an immersive, holographic wave. It's really fun. There's another thing which I think is consistently misunderstood. So, you'll often see these, a giant speaker, a 6-pack of RELs, it's glorious and it's wonderful. As you may remember, a few years ago, I decided to break that down. We actually used the KEF REL ones, KEF Ref ones to just come out. You've seen these, 6.5-inch two-way with the coincident tweeter. And they were in a room at the Bristol show, if you recall, it's all of 12 feet by 15 feet. This is not a big room. Speakers aren't enormous, and yet we had a 6-pack of REL 510s, and I had to put them in the middle, just to the inside of the speakers, which broke every rule in the book. The sound staging, the image precision was astounding. And it just goes to show that it's a concept that doesn't require massive rooms, massively expensive kit. That whole system retailed for about $25,000. That is a lot of money. I'm not dispelling that, but what I will say is it sounded better than a number of £100,000 systems I heard at the show. And part of it was it fit the room. It made sense. We weren't trying to shove a massive 40,000 pound speaker into a room that's 12 by 15. It's a terrible concept, right? So horses for courses, we get the speakers to perfectly fit the room, and somewhat surprisingly, the REL 6-pack works even in very small rooms.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we rarely get across properly is that the perfect position for treble and mid-range is never the perfect position for bass in a room.
Couldn't say more. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Anyway, listen, John, I'm terribly sorry that I was the coughing guy, because that's the way I am at the moment, but it isn't COVID. And thank you very much.
Thank you
we'll
so
speak
much.
again.
Good to see you, Alan.
Take care.
Thank you.